Hey, Matt.
Hello, thanks so much for joining us and being our first guest. So, after some very turbulent times here in Europe, the war in Ukraine, it's now been quite an eventful few days. So let's just unpack a little bit about what's been going on. Russian warplanes spotted in Estonian airspace on Friday. Poland and Romania are also saying they've spotted Russian drones. Drones spotted in Denmark and Norway as well. How do you see these developments more generally affecting geopolitical tensions in the region?
Well, these are Russian preparations. Every time they send a drone or an aircraft, or they're doing things on the Baltic Sea, this is all testing our preparation, our readiness, our response times, and also they're testing our resolve. If we don't do anything, if we don't impose any consequences on the Kremlin, then they'll just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. So it's a dangerous time, but it doesn't mean it's inevitable that there is a war. But Russia is definitely at war with us.
So, I mean, just reflecting a little bit on some of those comments then, you say they're testing us, they're trying to push things as far as they can go, but do you see this as a signal of more action on the ground, or do you think it's about just trying to show their power at the moment?
Well, I think, first of all, every time they launch aircraft that violate NATO airspace, for example, it will inform their calculations for the next time. How quickly were they identified? How quickly did somebody put aircraft up to respond to it? So it is part of their analysis of us. But also,
we should say they have denied violating airspace, just to put their perspective forward. And the drones spotted in
I think that
Denmark and Norway.
People in Finland are not confused about Russia's intentions.
I mean, of course, there's a long history, but as a journalist, it's important to put that side of the story, that there hasn't been a huge amount of response, and we don't know for sure about the drones in Norway and Denmark, but wherever they've come from, and as you say, the likelihood very much Russia, that what we've seen is the impact on the logistics, how much it can disrupt things for people. If, we've seen airport closures, transport, that's going to have a huge impact on business and daily life. Do you think we should need to get ready for more of this? Do we need to be prepared for more of this kind of action?
Well, that's the danger, is that too many people, especially west of here, still don't acknowledge that Russia is at war with us. And our vulnerability for all manner of transportation and communication is very clear. And each of these incidents shows. And so, of course, each of our nations has to take steps to protect that infrastructure. Now, you can't defend every meter of rail or every single corner of every port, but you have to have the resilience against the inevitable damage that might be done. But I think companies as well as countries have to accept responsibility. You can't act like there's no threat. Russia knows that if there is a conflict in Europe for which they have attacked a NATO country, they know that NATO's response depends on rapid reinforcement. So all of our airports and seaports and rail will be attacked because they know we depend on that. We have to anticipate that and make sure that it is resilient enough.
So what might that look like in practical terms? Where do individual countries need to perhaps step up in ways that they haven't been doing or haven't needed to practically demonstrate until now?
So imagine everything that happens in Ukraine almost every night. Imagine that happening in Helsinki, Stockholm, Tallinn, Riga, Gdansk, Klaipeda, every night. That happens in Ukraine. That's what will happen to our seaports if Russia has made the terrible decision to attack a NATO country, is to go after. So that means we have to have adequate air and missile defense against drones, against Russian aircraft, against ballistic missiles. But also there will be things happening at sea. I mean, they have already shown that they are very interested in the underwater cables and pipelines.
Yeah.
Okay, well, these are exactly the things you would do if you were about to start a conflict against NATO, would be to rupture underwater cables, to create confusion. Imagine fake phone calls going out to all kinds of authorities. These are the sort of things that we should anticipate.
And how prepared do you think NATO is? I mean, on Friday we were talking about, I think it was 12 minutes in Estonian airspace, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but actually that is quite a long time in military terms, isn't it?
12 minutes in a jet flying over Estonia, you can cover a lot of ground. So that was a very long time. And I think that the alliance recognizes that Russia has increased its level of aggression because we haven't yet really inflicted consequences on the Kremlin. So this, the creation of this Operation Eastern Century represents a step up by NATO to increase readiness, increase awareness. Something as basic as changing the Baltic Sea air policing mission, changing it to air defense. That means rules of engagement that would allow a pilot to shoot down a drone, for example.
You mentioned consequences. Are you a supporter of tougher sanctions against Russia or some of Russia's enablers, other countries?
Well, first of all, we need to enforce the sanctions that are there. Every drone that lands in Ukraine, they find parts, components from the US, Switzerland, other countries that somehow get around sanctions and end up in these drones. So let's enforce the sanctions that are in place. But also, you know, every day, 3 tankers full of Russian oil sail out of the Baltic Sea and head to China or India and other customers. If we were serious about helping stop Russia, we would stop their ability to export oil, which is the only way that they can stay in the war, is by selling oil. So,
do you think that's feasible, though? Are European governments really going to go for that?
Well, that's been our challenge, the political will to do what needs to be done. You know, President Stubb here in Finland hosted a meeting back in January where he invited all the heads of government from all the countries around the Baltic Sea to address these attacks on infrastructure, but also the illegal shadow fleet that sails out every day. Nations have the right to protect their coastlines from an environmental disaster, for example. Every one of these shadow fleet vessels are end-of-life vessels. They're an environmental disaster waiting to happen. So, of course, nations should go out, stop them, make sure that they're safe, environmentally sound, properly insured, and I would say probably about 90% of them are not. So there are things that nations can do to address this. It's not just about whether or not we shoot down a Russian aircraft.
The EU in general has promised to invest a lot more money in defense. It has a variety of different programs. We're also seeing in the private sector a huge boom in defense tech, including here in Helsinki. It's one of the hottest hubs when it comes to new kind of military innovations to help us potentially prepare for war or other types of conflict. But one thing I've been hearing from speaking to startups in Helsinki is that there can be a bit of a disconnect between the kind of high-paced innovation of a startup and the procurement processes, the long processes needed in the military in order to get products safe and out there. Do you think that's something that needs to be looked at? Does the military need to get better at being speedier and finding new solutions to help protect us?
So certainly one of the things that we are all envious of Ukraine is how quickly they put new technology in the hands of soldiers and allow them to test it and use it. Now, that's easier said than done. Obviously, Ukraine is fighting for its very survival right now, so governments do certain things that would not typically happen in normal time. Finnish taxpayers, German taxpayers, American taxpayers would expect that whatever is being spent on defense is being spent properly. And so you end up with a risk aversion about something that has to be 100%, you know. And I think in Ukraine, they're quite happy to try something that's maybe a 70% or 80% solution. So that would require some legal adjustments in all of our countries, and also a tolerance by our political leaders to say, okay, this is not perfect, but let's get the capability out there. And then the military has to stop this habit we have of changing the requirements, adding more capabilities. Stick with the requirement, get that right first.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, you can see the counter arguments of concerns about budgets, legal hurdles, and obviously wanting the safety of products, both for the people using them and the people.
That's a key thing. A lot of the regulations are intended for the safety of the soldier, of the user, when in fact you could probably accelerate that process without so much redundant testing.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about businesses. I've got some statistics here because I know a lot of you business leaders feel it's a very risky time. Deloitte did a spring survey of CFOs around Europe and found that 90% now rank geopolitics among their top business risks. So this is more than cyber attacks, more than climate change. Do you think corporate leaders are right to be this concerned?
They should be. I mean, freedom of navigation, ships carrying product or your supply chains, the international waters people are able to move because navies have ensured that. It's competitive. And so when you see disruptions to freedom of navigation, like in the Red Sea, or what Russia routinely does in the Baltic Sea and in the Black Sea, it affects business, access to energy. Russia's attack on Ukraine disrupted energy flows as well as disrupting food supplies that go to a large part of the world. Of course, stopping this war, helping Ukraine defeat Russia is not just because we're so impressed with Ukraine, it's because it is terrible for our business.
So what should business leaders be doing? How can you practically prepare for these worst case scenarios?
I think, once again, Finland is a great example of comprehensive defense, comprehensive preparation. CEOs here routinely attend exercises and courses run by the Ministry of Defense so that they understand how the nation defends itself. I think an awareness. And also there's I don't want to say a moral aspect to this, compliance with the law. If there are sanctions against Russia or China, for example, then make sure your company is in compliance because that's the right thing to do. But also, you should hold your Ministry of Defense accountable for, there's a lot of money out there. Make sure that that's being used properly.
And just before we introduce our next guest, I suppose I'd like a bit of context here because especially here in the Nordic region, it is a tense time and it is very different to what's been experienced in a region that has largely experienced peace for decades and decades. But you've had a long career, more than 30 years in the military, different conflicts. Are we right to think that this is the scariest and most stressful time?
Well, certainly we are in a situation where if we don't stick together, I'm talking about Europe and US, UK, Canada, if we don't stick together, then the chance of Russia making a terrible miscalculation goes up. We don't have to have an expansion of this conflict. In fact, Russia should have been defeated a couple of years ago. If you compare the combined economies and militaries and technology of Europe to Russia. But it's been our unwillingness to work together in a very cohesive way. And I acknowledge that my own country, the United States, has raised more questions than answers in the last 8 months, which is not helpful. But if Ukraine fails, that problem is going to land right here in Europe's lap. Millions more refugees, Russia emboldened that it could do more. So I think now is the time that all of us have to be very clear to the Kremlin. You live inside your own borders. You live up to international agreements, and then we can play hockey again. We can trade. But until Russia does that, and they won't do that, they will only change their behavior when they're forced to.
So you're very much on the line of tougher action, tougher sanctions.
Yeah, absolutely. Russia, they will complain about it, exactly what Foreign Minister Sikorsky said yesterday. Don't come here to the UN and whine when we finally shoot down one of your aircraft. They will complain, of course, but they know, and I think people here know, that Russia really only respects strength.
Ben, stay with us. We're going to keep you here in the HSVZO studio and welcome another guest to join the discussions. Just a reminder to all of you watching at home or from the office, you can get involved in the discussion by sending in your questions. You can do that through the event platform that you're watching on, and same to people in the audience. You can send questions to Ben and all of our next guests through the Brella app.